Welcome into the last edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast for 2021. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. Ryan, we've been doing this 6 months, buddy. It's hard to believe that amount of time has gone by, but it has. And we are now here in the final week of 2021. Penn State getting ready to play the Outback Bowl and conclude its season. We're concluding ours here on the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast with a year in review. First off, Ryan, happy holidays to you and the family. Wishing you all a happy new year. And, of course, to our fans as well. We'll be back in the first week of 2022. But we have a lot to review and revisit about 2021 before that. First of all, how are we doing? How's things going? And are you winning anything on bowl games? Or do we need to look back to the bowl betting preview edition that the season betting preview edition that Dave and I did to find some good news and good nuggets?
I'm trying to pull up my numbers right now. Well, in our bowl pick'em, I'm hitting 55%. So, I mean, that's okay. I'm in the mix. I'm third. Actual plays, I don't know. I mean, I guess if I don't know, it's not good, right?
Right.
So if I can win this bowl pick'em, that'd be good, though. Yeah,
there's time to bounce back.
Yeah, the big games are coming up here now. They're just getting started now. So
that's right.
I couldn't tell you a whole lot about, what was it, Kent State, Wyoming the other day. So, although I had Kent State and I lost. So anyway, move on.
Anyway, yeah, Wyoming, Kent State in a barn burner of a game. And if you had the over, you were in good shape. Let's start our review here of 2021 for Penn State recruiting. Obviously, a good year for the Lions, both in the transfer portal as it relates to the 2021 season, and then, of course, with momentum to sign a currently top 10 class of 2022. The first commit of the year actually happened on New Year's Day. It was Mekhi Flowers, who at the time was playing at Steel High, I believe. He's now going to graduate from Central Dauphin East High School here in the Harrisburg area and enroll, and become a Nittany Lion and start his career on defense at safety, as will Christian Driver, another guy who possibly was, going to start his career on offense. So let's start with Mekhi. What are your impressions of him, and what do you remember about that commitment?
I remember being, was it at midnight? I think it was. I mean, we
believe so, yes.
Pre-wrote those. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it was at midnight. So, doing a little work at midnight. That's fun. But, I mean,
what other way would you celebrate New Year's Eve, buddy? I can't think of any other way to celebrate New Year's Eve other than that.
With a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, we weren't doing anything, so I can't complain. That was the Derek Wingo on Christmas was the one that was a couple years ago, yes. Of course. Yeah, that I was literally walking out the door to go to our relatives, so that was one that my wife will never let me hear the end of. But this one, I mean, Mekhi was cool. He, obviously we spoke before and had everything ready to go. Just kind of had to click a couple buttons, send a couple tweets, and it wasn't too bad. But I think Mekhi's
in the morning he committed, so it was not midnight, thankfully.
Oh, it wasn't?
No.
Okay, well, we wrote it the night before.
No, the New Year's Eve midnight commitment, it was the year Penn State was at the Rose Bowl. I'm trying to think who that was, but he didn't He didn't he either came to Penn State and left or didn't even make it here. I'll have to look that up while we're talking here.
I remember having one at New Year's. Yeah, I definitely remember having one like that. So, okay.
Yes. Well, at any rate, the last commit of the year then for Penn State in the class of 2022 was Amari Evans, and he's the guy we talked about at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com last week as someone who Penn State thinks is a very special player and could maybe contribute early. Ryan, his final two were Rutgers and Penn State, and there are not many Texas kids who decide between Rutgers and Penn State. His father does live in the Midwest, so that's part of the connection there, but he's a really good get, and I think it's probably a little bit surprising to fans that his commitment, which came in October, was the last one of this class. But then again, there were so many guys committed before the season even started that it's not a total shocker. Though I don't think any of us would have been surprised if Penn State would have landed maybe one. If you would have asked back in October, I think it probably would have been fair to say that they would get one more. That did not end up being the case.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, Emil Wagner to Deshaun Barnes to a bunch of guys that they were trying to flip at the end. But again, at the time, was that 27 did they reach, I believe, at the time? So, I mean, they were that was pretty much the max. I don't know how they were going to fit more guys in, but I think they also, always kind of expected it to not quite finish there as far as the guys they had committed at the time. So, that definitely would have been my pick for the last one. But, when they're still at number 7 in the polls or in the rankings. And, that's what happens when you have a crazy summer, which I think we're going to get into here in a bit.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, that's the next part of this Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast Year in Review edition. The best part of visits returning in the summer. And you and I talked when I first came on board with BWI back in July that, June was one of the crazy. June and July were just nuts, and with good reason. I mean, official visits came back, and guys had a chance to come to campus for the first time in a very, very long time because of the coronavirus dead period, of course. And they didn't waste any time getting there. There was no wasted movement really by anyone who either is a part of Penn State's class or was considered to be a caliber of player to be a part of Penn State's class, and the coaching staff as well. Everyone was flying around. We'll combine these next two sections, Ryan, but June and July, the craziest part of the year, no question, and the best part of it for Penn State because they were able to showcase a lot of the things they obviously could not give justice with electronic communication, and that made a big difference.
So my numbers were 120, a little over 120. I don't know if I always miss somebody, but the numbers I had were 120 prospects for an unofficial or official visit. And I think it was probably somewhere close to like 123, 124. There were 1,300 high school kids for 7 different camps, a 7-on-7 that had 54 schools attend. So I don't know how many kids that was, but it was nuts. And then I according to what I had for my list, there were only 2 days between June 1st and June 27th that didn't have at least one prospect on campus. So, yeah, that was unlike anything we've seen. I remember, like behind the scenes, we're always like, God, this is hard. And I remember speaking with Penn State people, and like I would say that to them, and then I'd catch myself real quick and be like, actually, what I'm doing right now is nowhere near as difficult as what you guys are doing up there in Lash. So. But it was wild, man. I mean, I definitely remember talking to, just different sources I have up there, and they were worn out. I mean, there were people basically just sleeping in Lash throughout June because they would have visits go deep into the night, and then, they'd have to get ready for the next day. I mean, I know some people were working. I remember I got a call one time at like 1:30, and I texted the person at, midnight or so, and it was just like, yeah, you're going to be up for a while. Yeah. I didn't expect it to be 1:30. I was actually still up working at the time, but that's kind of the point. It's just, everybody was working deep into the nights, and then you'd have a new group of, or just even a single recruit coming on campus at 7, 8 a.m. So, just sleep and Lash. And that happened quite a few occasions, but it paid off, right? I mean, nobody can deny that the hard work didn't pay off in the end. So the one thing, so for our first, what we were going to get into was what was the best part of visits returning. And I look at it in two different ways. I look at it obviously as from Penn State's perspective. I say this all the time, but State College isn't for everybody. You and I, we like the area, and everyone watching this, obviously, I think loves State College. Many of you went here to school, but there are a lot of guys who just prefer a more urban setting. The drive to get here, kind of. Right. So sometimes that drive alone,
it's not as easy as the Beaver Stadium car race makes it look to get
from
Harrisburg to State College, or really anywhere to State College.
Yeah. On the scoreboard, I think fans will know. What was it? Utz sponsored that. I think it was
the Utz car race where you can get to. Don't even get me started. I don't even want to go there.
But I just always look at the mountains.
Yeah, right.
The mountains look. I felt like we were like in Boulder or something on the scoreboard. But all right. Anyway, to the point. So being able to show State College again, and he was able to weed out the guys that like, hey, look, I like your program, but this isn't for me. And it was also able to get those guys who, hey, I really like your program. I know nothing about the area. And then, you get them up here, they love it. And that seals kind of the deal. From my perspective, what was nice is just being able to see guys again. So, of course, I was able to see some guys in the camp season in March, April, and May. But there's so many guys that I've never met before, who, especially guys that didn't really live in PA, Maryland area. And so just being able to see them, we weren't allowed at camp for Penn State's camps this year, but when they leave and stuff, and there's so many photos of guys in those camp jerseys, like outside Beaver Stadium. That's because we were just kind of posted up there, getting photos of guys as they would come and go. But just being able to introduce yourself to parents, that was so big for me. I've been bugging these guys for how many months, and they've never really met me in person. So that for me, that was the biggest takeaway. And then of course for Penn State, just being able to get guys here and sell what Penn State and State College have to offer.
I think that'll help with the transfer portal losses too. I mean, you're going to have guys move on every year for on-field reasons. or playing time reasons or whatever. Maybe their position coach left and they don't like the new one. Maybe the coordinator changed. There's going to be guys that go in the portal every single year. You're never going to completely avoid that. But I think it is possible to say that you can at least weed out some of the ones who or reduce, I guess, the ones who would come here for a year and say, you know what, this place is not for me whatsoever. I don't like how cold it gets in the winter. I don't care for what there's to do when we're here in the summer, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on. So that, I think, to me, is the best part of these visits coming back, and it kind of curtails what you were saying, just the fact that, roster management is so hard in this day and age. And when you're recruiting guys holding up a phone to show them a forum, the forum building and a lecture hall, or show them Beaver Stadium or what have you. I mean, it's one thing to look at it through glass and a cell phone, and it's another to actually see it with your own eyes and say, I can see myself here. Or conversely, I can't see myself here at all. So certainly a big part of that stretch for Penn State. And, of course, I think the fall visits, too, were really key. You look at the trend of committing on the field. That was interesting for us, for sure, and something that was kind of new this year in terms of the number of guys who did it. But, Ryan, I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So when we look back at this year, I think we probably can highlight that as something that fans should maybe get used to, because I think it's going to happen more and more in the future.
Yeah, Penn State seems to like that. It's kind of surprising to me just because it feels like the commitment
Say that
gets
again, just so we're all clear. Say that again.
It's surprising to me because the commitment gets no credit that day. You know what I mean?
I was actually referring to the fact that you said Penn State seems to like it, because I know we get some folks upset inside the Lions Den message board at blueeyeillustrated.com that it's a distraction for the coaches and stuff. And those 30 seconds are just not. They are not the reason
guys.
Penn State can't run the ball. They are not the reason the Lions lost to Illinois. They are not the reason.
I should have known.
Sean Clifford is sometimes inaccurate, or that tackles are sometimes missed. The 30 seconds the kid takes to commit and hug James Franklin with his family are not the reason for the Lions' problem.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I should have known that's what you're referring to.
I've been holding on to that for a little bit, so I'm glad I got it out here before the end of the year. That's good. Turn a new page for 2022. But yeah, go ahead.
I mean, those visits are basically planned, guys. I don't think Lamont Payne was quite planned, but I think the other two.
That was definitely more off the cuff for sure.
Yeah, then of course Lamont was the first, but Matthias knew what he was going to do, and so did Joey Schleffler. So, but yeah, they're definitely not planned, and I could see that continuing. It does surprise me a little bit because it feels. I remember being outside of Beaver Stadium after one of the games, and someone was like, "Oh, Penn State got a commitment today." Like I had and just walking by, listening to people, and it just always kind of feels like the player doesn't get the credit he would if it was like a Monday night or something like that. Right. But I would be surprised if that doesn't continue next season. Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, we're about halfway through this edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. You can find all of our work at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Find us on YouTube if you're watching us there. Thank you. And if you've enjoyed these YouTube videos, and of course the BWI Daily with T. Frank, we really appreciate you subscribing and leaving any feedback you have for us at youtube.com/bluewhiteillustrated. And if you are watching there and you want the audio versions of these, you can find them anywhere you get your audio, be it Apple, Spotify, Google. I know at first we had a hard time getting on the Apple, so thanks for all of you who stuck with us through that. And then we had a little Spotify blip as we were learning kind of how these things have to work. And now we should be all systems go as we close out 2021 here. Ryan, let's move along to our next topic, and I think it's one that Penn State fans are going to be really interested in. The craziest recruitment you followed this year. I think we both could make one easy pick here, but where do you want to start and where do you want to take it? Go ahead.
Well, Andre Roy, of course, would be the one that was just like, wait, what? He just committed? Like, what happened here? Of course,
right.
Committing on a Thursday night, and then there's no bat signal for an hour or two. And, I come to learn that it's just because Penn State wanted to put a bat signal out, but they just wanted to speak with the player first. And Andre just, I don't know, for some reason, didn't speak with them for, I think it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. But I would say this. It depends on how. I would say it depends on how you want to look at craziest, though. What is craziest to you? I mean, to me, when I look at, I'll go with Denai Dennis Sutton here from the perspective of it got so much attention. Like fans were just absolutely wanted to know every detail of Denai Dennis Sutton. I could not talk about Denai Dennis Sutton enough in early July and even at the end of in June as well. I mean, Whenever Penn State's duking it out with Alabama and Georgia for an elite pass rusher. And then there was talk at one point that he was leaning towards Georgia. And Nittany will say, I mean, Athens was very enticing. Just the town there and everything that they have to offer from a facility perspective. I do think at one point, man, he was seriously considering it. But Penn State did an awesome job. Kenny Sanders, of course, has McDonough ties. He was a big part of that. And of course, give it to John Scott and the whole defensive staff and Franklin as well. But as far as just what fans were just crazy about and they needed to know what was going on every second, I would absolutely go with Nittany as my pick.
Yeah, that was a fascinating recruitment. I remember David Eckert and I were out in Indianapolis at Big Ten Media Days, and James Franklin had a little bit of a bigger smile on his face as that announcement time grew closer because he knew what was around the corner, and it was a huge win for Penn State. Nittany, not one of Penn State's early enrollees, but they think he can contribute early. Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the one where, from the Penn State side of it, you couldn't give enough information about it. And then the other one I would say going away from Penn State, I'd point to Jayshon Barham because he was asked about just as much as Dennis Sutton was, except he didn't go to Penn State and there was never anything new to share from the Jayshon Barham camp before he committed to South Carolina 4 days before signing day and then flipped to Maryland on signing day. So
they were like the exact opposites though.
Yeah,
like
Nittany,
so.
Yes.
Nittany I could get anytime I wanted, and he would be open if there was a change. He'd tell you. But normally there wasn't. I mean, it's not like these things change every couple of days. They have the same kind of talks with the coaches all the time, and not much really changes. But yeah, they just were exact opposites in a different way. And you were speaking about Indianapolis. It was I remember working with you. I was in Colorado at the time for my sister's wedding. Oh man, I missed the rehearsal dinner. It was that was a crazy day, crazy commitment. There was a lot that went into that one. You and David came up clutch, so thank you.
Your wife probably won't let you forget about that anytime soon either.
My sister more so. My wife had to watch the kids, so at a rehearsal, which wasn't ever good. But I ended up making the most important part. I just missed the part where they just talk to you about whatever. No one's paying attention anyway. I did my walk. We were good.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on to the moment you knew that Penn State had a class that could be a top 10 group. I mean, to me, I went with the 4th of July weekend when they went into it and landed, 4 commitments between July 2nd and July 4th, and then Nick Singleton committed 2 days later. You actually went a little bit earlier than this, I believe. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, so look, they had 7 4-star players committed out of their first 8. And you know who wasn't the 4-star?
Drew Aller.
The best player in the class,
Yeah,
Drew Aller. Yeah.
So, so 6 months ago, we were having a very different conversation at a different place about that, our previous institution. Yeah, right. No, that's a good point. I forgot about that. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. So just, of course, I mean, Bo Prabula was a 4-star at Rivals at the time, and Drew, of course, wasn't. So just, I mean, whenever you have 7 4-star players committed right off the bat, and they were always ranked incredibly high.
Yep.
So when you have that, right, and then you have denied Dennis Sutton, we knew at the time was like, okay, we think he's favoring Penn State, and you had Nick Singleton out there, who, of course, Notre Dame made it interesting, but we always thought Penn State was very much a player. To me, it was like, look what I have here, and look what's potential, realistically available. That's kind of when it started, coming to my mind that that's realistic. Now, of course, you got to land the guys, and it wasn't truly, apparent until July. But when you're doing the math and you're looking what's available, I think at the end of beginning of April, I guess we'll say, because Aller committed, I think, early March, and I think then Malik wasn't until May, I want to say. But between that gap there, it felt like, okay, something's brewing here.
Well, we're talking about Drew Aller, so I'm going to change the rundown on you a bit. The biggest get for Penn State in this class, you went with him, and, Mike Yursich made him such a priority during the recruiting cycle from a very early point. It was clear that Mike Yursich wanted Drew Aller, and that Drew Aller, it quickly became clear as well that Drew Aller wanted to play for Mike Yursich, and you've been doing this a long time. I'm sure you can probably count on the number of players who have made such a meteoric rise through the rankings as he had. Does anyone even close to come to mind? I don't think so.
No. Especially because
that's what
he's
makes
a quarterback.
It the biggest get, I'm sure, for you, yes.
Yeah, especially because he's a quarterback, at that position. Usually you always have those 3, 4, 5 guys who start at the top, they end at the top. Very early that they're going to be the guys. So, yeah, I can't think of a rise like that I mean, now I'll also just keep in perspective that the pandemic had a big part in that.
Sure,
If the
absolutely. There's
pandemic
no
doesn't
question.
happen, yeah, and he's at camps the year prior. I don't think I think he's probably probably a
Would he have
rivals.
been? Would he have
Because
been a
we're at rivals
4-star
at the time.
sooner?
I mean, I would hope, but I don't know. You got to talk to the rivals guys about that. But of course, we're referring because we were at rivals originally, so I'm thinking of those rankings at the time. But yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic clearly had a big part in that, because once he got out there and Elite 11 and then Elite 11 finals, I mean, it just was all uphill from there.
What about the biggest miss for Penn State? Where'd you go there?
Where did I go?
You went with Nittany White. I can tell you if you don't know. You went with Nittany White.
So I wrote that. I think a lot of fans would pick Nittany. But I was never
ever seriously. Let's just say this: was Penn State ever seriously in that recruitment?
No.
So then that's
kind of what I wrote.
I mean, that just is what it is.
Yeah, you're right. But the other guy I picked too was the same way, and so I wrote Nittany just because, I think in fans' perspective, he's the number one player in PA. He's a Philly guy. You got to get him. And Penn State pushed hard for him, no doubt about it. But just to me, I never got the vibe that Penn State should be a top 3 team. But the other guy I did say, who was the exact same way, and I struggled with this one a little bit, was Andre Green, wide receiver, of course, who committed to North Carolina. I mean, I never, I don't think he ever even visited Penn State. But, I know Penn State recruited him incredibly hard. I know at one point he was, without a doubt, their number one wide receiver target. And then I also know what I watched that day at Under Armour Baltimore camp, and it was incredibly special. I think North Carolina got themselves they got themselves a diamond here. I really believe that.
Yeah, I went with Emil Wagner. I just think he has all of the traits you want in an offensive lineman. I think Notre Dame got a tremendous get there. And, Penn State was in that recruitment. It seemed like, Kentucky, Ohio State maybe at one point or another were trending there, and he ends up at Notre Dame, which I'm not sure if you would have asked people last July or even June if he was going to go to Notre Dame. You probably would have thought, I don't know about that. I mean, I talked to him back in the summer, and sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't, and obviously things change, but he was not, the answers he gave about Notre Dame were not exactly the longest ones of the conversation. That actually was about Ohio State at the point in time that I talked to him. So that was fascinating to me. But, I think he's a guy you're going to see play a lot over the years ahead, and I think it would have really helped Penn State at a time when, buddy, I'm telling you, the tackle and just general offensive line depth is not great for Penn State right now in terms of the number of guys who can actually go out and play. So that's why I go with him.
Portal, man, it's going to be monsters. Absolutely monsters here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of Penn State fans have been frustrated by Penn State being slow, in their opinion, slow to start with portal guys. But, James Franklin, I thought, said it best, and we'll just detour this conversation quickly. But I mean, so many of these guys, Ryan, for the most part, when they go into the portal, they know where they're going next. They have their next stop.
Yeah.
And you can offer a guy, but if he knows where he's going, who cares if you offered him? It makes no difference. You never had a chance anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, I mean, I don't really have a lot more to add to that. I mean, the only thing I would say is just, by this time last year, Penn State had a few guys jumping on board. I mean, this week was when Ebiketie, Tangelo, John Dixon.
Yeah,
I want to say
the important part of that is that the season ended later. So, I mean, I think
that's true. That's a good point.
You can look at that and say that, this week was important then, but at the same time, you can also say that, the season ended later. So, I don't know. And last year, it's really hard to, I think, use, and this is why some fans are frustrated, because Penn State made these moves before the new year in large quantity a year ago. And I think it's just a totally different game right now. There's bowl games, which there were bowl games last year that everyone played in them. Guys are able to maybe jump on a plane more easily and go see a place they might want to visit. Even it's a dead period, they'd have to do it self-guided, but they could, whereas last year it really everything was electronic. So I think there's some key differences here. That's not really the point of this podcast.
Hunter Nourzad.
What's that?
Hunter Nourzad. I mean, Hunter Nourzad, the Cornell O-lineman, I believe he was first team All-Ivy. I believe Nourzad's how to pronounce his last name. I apologize if it's not, but he's without a doubt the guy. Penn State fans, if you're going to put somebody on Twitter notifications or want to follow all the time, that's your guy, because they really want him.
Very good. All right, let's move on to the recruit you thought Penn State would get, but it didn't, and then the one guy that it did get that you thought would maybe get away.
Yeah. So Anto Saka was kind of my pick here, and Moses Walker. I kind of debated between the two. With Anto Saka, I mean, just a lot of about him fits Penn State. Just cares academically. I mean, really bright kid. There just was so many things there. A lot remind me a lot of Jesse Laquetta in a lot of different ways. Just getting to know him. He ended up at Northwestern. I mean, Northwestern, man, incredible. Like I said, I mean, academics are incredibly important. I believe.
And
I believe
facilities. I mean,
father.
as far as at
Yeah.
least what they share publicly, and there's a reason they share it publicly. It's why we're doing a recruiting podcast. But
Mhm.
the stuff that they put out there, their facilities are top notch. Even though the team,
Yeah.
isn't always.
I think academics is the thing though. Like
Yeah,
I believe his parents. I believe one of his parents is a doctor, and like that was I knew right from the start that academics were going to have a monstrous role here, and it played out that way. It was the same with Austin Firestone too. I don't know if you remember that young man, offensive lineman
I
from
do.
Florida, who I thought at one point like Troutwine led with, and he was incredibly important to Trout and all that. But academics were just going to be monstrous, and of course he ended up at Northwestern too. So I thought those were two good gets for Northwestern. And then just real quick, I want to mention Moses Walker because I mean, Rutgers straight up beat out Penn State for that, and you do not see that very often. I thought at the end Penn State would beat out Rutgers. I knew Rutgers had the edge, and then he came for that official visit, and I was like, okay, here's where it flips. Here's where he's going to end up at Penn State, and he didn't. And of course, his tweet, sending it to Franklin and all that stuff. When he did that, that raised enough eyebrows, and Penn State kept pursuing him, but you kind of knew it was over by then. But yeah, those would be my two. And then as far as the guy they got, who I didn't expect,
I
it would
forgot
have to be
about that.
Zane
I did
Durant.
think about what you were talking about for a second. Yeah, I totally
Moses
forgot
Walker's
about that.
tweet?
But yeah, that was
Remember?
a new
His
one.
tweet to-
Yeah, that was. I don't know if I've ever seen a kid commit somewhere else and troll his troll someone who
The-
recruited him and
the opposing head coach.
Yeah,
No, of all, it's of all people, you freaking tag Franklin in it. Like, ugh.
yeah.
I think
so
it was like,
let's-
was
yeah,
it just
so
Franklin too?
It was.
I think it was
yeah.
like just Franklin. Like that
It
was the only tag.
Yeah. So let's just say this: if he ever ends up in the transfer portal, I think there's probably a decent chance that Penn State's not an option.
But bro, they kept pursuing him though. Like, I
True.
mean, they were going after him all the way through. Like, I think right after that happened, sure, there was definitely some people on Lash that were like, "Yo, screw this." But at the end, they were absolutely pursuing him. I mean, throughout, and then by the end, I mean like in the fall.
Yeah.
I don't know, like right at the end of December for the signing period, but I know they were definitely interested. They wanted to get him back on campus for a visit. So I mean, he's a heck of a player. I mean, speaking of like guys you see up close, he was one of, when we were talking about how the summer worked for me at least. Like he was one of those guys when I saw up close, I was like, oh, I understand now why this guy's incredibly important. I mean, he is just an ox. I mean, he looks like he can play already, and I wouldn't be surprised if he is playing pretty quickly.
I think so too.
Zane Durant? I want to add Zane Durant there, just the guy who I didn't think they'd land. I mean, up until like a week before he committed,
Yeah.
I just kind of had him as like, Florida guy, came up for a visit, saying all the right things, whatever. We'll see him end up down there. And, it was maybe not even a week. It was maybe like 5 days before he committed where people were like, hey, you might want to wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You might want to get on this one. So just give John Scott a hell of a lot of credit for that one, man, because that was a guy that I didn't really think would be on board. And then he's also a guy that the more I watch, the more I learn. I think Penn State got a really good player there.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Really talented guy who is going to come in and hope to play sooner rather than later. All right, last one here on this final edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast for 2021. The flip Penn State would like to have back. See, to me, number one, there's 4. And 3 really, because Jordan Allen and they, that kind of just ended. But
yeah, Penn State pretty much got him.
Yeah. So I mean, to me, the one that stands out the most, and your reasoning is fine. You're going to share it here in a second, but to me, it's Tyrese Fierbury. I just think his film is awesome, and his commitment lasted like 28 days, I think.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys who committed over the July 4th weekend, and then decommitted. I'm pretty sure before August hit. And many thought he would wind up at Pitt. Instead, he goes to Kentucky. So he was the one for me. I just think kind of like Emil Wagner. It's a position of need, and he's a really good player. So that's the one that I think if Penn State could wave a wand and have a flip back, that would be the one for me.
Yeah, no, and I mean he's the right pick. There's no doubt about it. He's an in-state guy.
This is
nonetheless.
the part where you say, I filled out this document first, so I got to pick him before you had a chance to. Isn't that what you're getting at here?
Yes, but I also, I mean, we've done this before, and I'll fill out the same thing you do. So my thought here was like, yes, okay, we're down to 4 guys, right? Jordan Allen, Penn State decided to go a different way. Andre Roy, surprised when he committed, not surprised when he decommitted. Like there was nothing, none of that recruitment was surprising. And then the only reason I lean towards Holden Stace a little bit more was just because Fairbury was all over the place too at times. Like even when he committed, I had people like, oh, there's going to be a lot of work that we still got to do here and all that kind of stuff. Where Stace really fit Penn State. I mean, and look, he ended up at Notre Dame, a school that's very similar in a lot of ways on how they, structure their program and what they expect from them as students and all that. So, but like again, like losing Tyler Bowen, I can find, pros and cons for all these guys, so that makes sense. I mean, losing Tyler Bowen in the NFL was a major reason why Stace decided to look around again, and that really wasn't anybody's fault. I mean, it's just kind of how recruitments play out sometimes. So I think like if you're asking guys in Lash Building, they would absolutely say Tyrese Fairbury. He was an incredibly important prospect. They pursued him throughout, even after the decommitment and the commitment to Kentucky and all that. I mean, he was always someone they were after. But I do think it's just notable to mention Holden Stace because he's a really good player that Penn State really wanted and would have fit the program well.
We can't thank everyone enough for listening to us and subscribing as we've kicked off this Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting podcast back in July. We have made some improvements along the way and hope to make some more. If you want to leave feedback, you can do that at youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated or whatever app you are listening to this podcast on. Don't forget, join Blue White Illustrated on 3. It's just $1 for 365 days of access. That gets you into the Lions Den forum where you can give us feedback on the podcast and other things as well. Ryan, final thoughts.
Like I said on our last one, man, just thank you guys so much for subscribing, not just our YouTube page, but of course to On3 and Blue White Illustrated. It's been an incredible year. I never, ever, ever expected the amount of people who would subscribe. And of course it's a $1 deal, right? So like I probably should have had higher expectations, but man, those last 2 months have been incredible. And just what we're doing moving forward, I hope people saw the NIL valuation algorithm that we're putting out there. I think a lot of athletes and fans are going to be looking towards that and really kind of realizing the power that social media has. And there's so many other cool database tools that we have coming. There's a state database and a school database. We're going to be able to look at, what Maryland, where does Pennsylvania really stack up compared to Ohio, Florida, California, Texas, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be incredibly in depth. We've been working on it behind the scenes for the longest time. I feel like that database is like embedded in my head, like the admin. I put so much work into it sometimes, but we really know that on the back end it's going to pay off. But just thanks everybody who's always subscribed to us. Thanks everybody who is new, and also thank everybody who giving us a listen on YouTube and just giving us a moment to get our names out there. I guess that's the
On3 NIL valuation post per value and the NIL 100 all coming out January 5, 2022. Stay tuned to that at on3.com. We'll talk to you about that in 2022 on the next edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. But for one final time in 2021, we're signing off. He's Ryan Snyder and I'm Greg Pickel. We'll talk to you more next year and next week. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for all your latest Penn State football and recruiting news.
Happy